All right, we are live. Welcome back, everyone. It's been a few weeks.
It's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a little while. I was out sick with the flu a couple of weeks ago, and then last week Sheldon was out sick with the flu.
Yeah, I was actually in America. We could have even done an episode while I was there, but I got the flu. Actually, a lot of us got the flu. I came in for a family reunion, and we all met up and everything. And it was like a Trump super spreader event. Like literally, half of us got the flu. Some of us got COVID. Luckily, it all happened though after the family party, so it was still fun and everything. But yeah.
Right, it was actually, and it ended up being good that we got sick with the flu beforehand because we had just come off of it, and then everyone else got sick. We already had it, so we were good.
No, like I don't even know the last time I felt that sick.
It was rough.
I don't get sick. I just get like pissed off when I'm sick. I don't have time to be sick or the patients to be sick. So like when I can't just like relax in bed or just like die in peace because I'm just like anxious. Like I have too many things to do. Like I can't even function. So I was just like, yeah. And I was on vacation. So and I'm using my vacation days from work. So I'm literally like, wow, like this is how I'm spending my vacation, sick. So yeah.
But yeah, on that topic of the family reunion. So obviously, we got a lot of feedback from our family and in addition to friends as well in terms of the podcast and things that they were, in topics that they were interested in us speaking about. And a lot of the feedback we got, a lot of the ideas or suggestions that people had, what they wanted to hear more about was us talk more about our past, our upbringing, how we kind of got to where we are today. Obviously, two very different people, kind of how we each kind of took our own paths to get where we were, and yet we, sort of maintain a relationship. So I think it's,
we sort of maintain a relationship. We sort of maintain a relationship. I can tolerate him
how we managed to remain amicable. But how we maintain a relationship. Our relationship got a lot stronger. Even we definitely got closer after much later on after you had come out already. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start.
Why don't you just out me right now on the podcast?
Exactly. I guess I'll start. I'll start with myself, or really, we should start with you since you're the older sibling. More about your childhood, what it was like growing up in an Orthodox.
Yeah. Oh, well, being 3.5 years older than you, I just have a vast more amount of life experience.
3 years, 30 years.
It's all the same. Well, I mean, we grew up in like the same household in like an Orthodox Jewish community in Chicago. We were always very different. You were like the classic, bro kind of guy. I was very much so not. Like literally the first CD I ever got in my entire life was Madonna's Don't Cry For Me Argentina. The second CD I ever got in my life was Britney Spears' Baby One More Time. It's kind of like my parents knew the entire time. It was kind of like a lead up. But obviously growing up in like an Orthodox community, it was something that like wasn't a thing. And as a kid, I always knew I was different, but I didn't know what I was. Like I wasn't going through puberty yet, but like it was just always very obvious that I was different. And I think that caused a lot of tension between you and I growing up because we were so different. And for me, I had resentment because you were like, what I wanted to be normal, quote unquote. And for you, I'm sure it was the fact like, my brother's so like effeminate, and I'm sure you would have friends say things to you. So like it created a weird dynamic in our household growing up. We were struggling with something that was connected, but also we didn't know what it was at the time and never spoke about anything because everything was so deep and buried in everything.
Right.
So yeah, it was pretty crazy times for sure.
No, definitely. I mean, obviously I knew something. I mean, I was very young, and obviously, coming out was much less common back then. So like
I always tell people, I always say, like when people ask me, like when I came out, like, did I know anybody? I always say the only people I knew who were gay were like Will and Jack from Will and Grace. Like that was it. I didn't know one person.
Right. I mean, I knew, I would say, I mean, I definitely knew before you told me, obviously. You knew that I already knew before you told me. Mom thought I didn't know, but I probably knew when I was already in like 4th or 5th grade, but I wasn't going to bring it up to you. I remember I did ask you one time. I don't know if you remember that we were at a hotel somewhere, maybe in Israel or Florida.
It was in California.
I was in California. Yeah. I remember I asked you once and you were like laughing. You were like, no. I'm like, okay.
But that was also already the point where I told mom and dad so they knew, because beforehand, like if you would have asked me in the time where like nobody knew and I was so in the closet, I would have died by having the question asked to me. Like I remember there was one time I was in summer camp in Israel between 10th and 11th grade. I remember having like a panic attack and like a breakdown where we were staying at like some like hostel motel place. And I remember like mom was like, you know, what, like I called her on the phone and she's like, what's going on? Like, you know, I mean, I'm just very overwhelmed. Like there's just a lot going on and like, you know, all these things happening and everything. And she's like, well, like, what is it? So she starts like asking me random questions. She's like, did you kill somebody? And I'm like, no. And then like one of the questions she asked, she's like, are you gay? And I'm like, and I remember like dying in the inside because at that point, like I wouldn't even utter the words because I was so closeted. It wasn't just about hiding it from everybody else. It was hiding it from myself because I didn't want this. And I remember like, you know, dying when she asked me that question. And it's really crazy. Like, I mean, I remember at that time in my life, like I thought I was just going to follow the path of like getting married, having kids, doing the whole shebang. Like I had a lot of like girlfriends and I'd be like, oh yeah, like we get along really well. Like we're best friends. Like there's this one girl that I was really close with in high school. I was like, yeah, like we're totally best friends. So, like I can marry her. Like that's how I would think of it. Because I tried to convince myself that it was something that I was able to do. Right. But yeah, no, it's definitely like looking back at it now, I don't know how it would have worked out. But when I did, like, you know, like come out initially to like our parents, it was to my mom first, our mom. Ironically, like the only reason why I even came out in the beginning is because like I was doing research online, like, you know, how do I not be gay and all this stuff. And I found this organization called Jonah, which stood for Jews Offering a New Alternative to Homosexuality. And their whole thing was like, you know, it's not a real thing. It's actually because of these different life experiences. Like one of the things they would say is like, your father wasn't around enough and your mother was too overbearing. And like, you know, our father, he was always working. I wasn't really close to them. My mom and I were best friends. So I was like, oh my God, like that totally makes sense. So I literally wrote a letter to our mom. I couldn't even say anything to her. I write her an email. I had to stay at my friend's house that night and I had to send her a text message to let her know that I sent her an email that I need her to read, but don't like call me afterwards. You can only text me. Like I couldn't even have her call me. And I remember like sending it to her and, but like the whole email was like, you know, this is the case, but don't worry because I found this thing and I'm going to change and blah, blah. And, you know, she did try calling me and stuff like that, but I couldn't answer. And then she like, you know, texted me that she loves me unconditionally and that whatever I choose to do, you know, she's going to support me 100%. Like, and also in the letter, I told her not to tell her dad, because I was too scared to like face with him and everything. So like, it's not like she ever pushed me into doing this, like, you know, program that I found. She was just supportive of whatever I wanted to do. Right. And then we realized that dad had to pay for it because our mom was a housewife who took care of all of us growing up, but dad was the one who made the money and she couldn't exactly just like put that in the credit card. He's gonna be like, what's this like gay therapy thing on the credit card? Like, wouldn't have worked out too well. Like, right. You want to tell me something? But yeah, no, I think he would have just been pissed I'm spending more of his money. So yeah, so then I realized I had to tell him. So I wrote him a letter, put it on his desk, stayed in my room, and we had like an intercom system. He like called me in my room to come to his office, and it was the first time in my life I ever saw dad cry ever. And he like gave me a huge hug, a really, really deep hug, like not like, you know, one of those like usual ones, which is like a panty rack. And he said like he loves me unconditionally, and then like after, you know, we were crying and all of that, like he sat down, he's like, what do you need me to do? Like, what do you need? Like, what, like, if you want to do this, like, you know, okay, I'll support you. Like whatever I wanted to do, he was like ready to do. Like I remember telling him I wanted to go away for like 4 days by myself just to like think about everything. I ended up going to like Wisconsin, driving to Wisconsin, staying at some random hotel, like the Fisker.
Really? I don't even remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so
and I wanted to go to like Geneva, but you had to be like 18 to check in. I was 17 at the time. So so I ended up going to some random place in like Wisconsin. And yeah, so then I did this whole like program that I got into, and they really harped on the fact that it's Jewish, like it's so, and you know, that's how we were raised. Like it was, you know, Judaism was like number one thing, so they really preyed on that. I was lucky enough where we lived in Chicago, so they didn't have any therapists there. They were located in like New Jersey and New York. So I had to do it over FaceTime. They didn't have FaceTime, over Skype and phone. I only started on the phone at first because I couldn't even like face anybody and talk to them. But they presented it to me in a very Jewish way. And then when I was set up with like the therapist, it ended up being someone who was Mormon. And I was like, I didn't even know what Mormon was at that time. It's not like I was like, oh, Mormon. Well, like, why would they say? I didn't even know what that meant. But it was interesting to me. He wasn't Jewish. And then, and yes, then like when I started, it was just like a very dark thing. I mean, it could be like a whole story. I don't want to like, take up from everything, talking about, but it was just, luckily I only did like 4 or 5 sessions in total until like, I'm a kind of person where like, I'm very detail oriented. I'm a little OCD, and by a little, I mean a heck of a lot. And I need to know things. So like, I wanted to know, like, I remember one of the times, like, how successful is it? Like what it, like, it can't just be like you sign up for this program and bam, you're not gay. Like you're de-gayed. So like, I remember him getting very angry at me with that question and like yelling at me about how,
why would therapist?
Yeah. Like, why would I be asking him this question? Like, if I'm asking this question, clearly I'm not putting in the work and blah, blah, blah. And what they do in this therapy is they alienate you from your parents. So like mama's too overbearing. So I had to push her away. Dad was too far. So I had to get closer, but I also had to be mad at him because I didn't learn my masculinity from him growing up and he affected me. So they alienate you from your parents. And on top of that, while you're doing this so-called therapy, if you're not making progress or this de-gaying isn't working, it's your fault because you're not doing the work. And so it's this constant thing and led me into a deep depression. But luckily I was strong enough where after like 5 sessions, I was like, it's not going to work. Like, this isn't a real thing. And it's not like I was like, okay, it's not real. Like I'm coming out. Like I still struggle with it like a lot, like just accepting, all of it. And yeah, and luckily I have a very supportive family. I'm very, very lucky. I know there's a lot of people who aren't like that. I couldn't have expected my family to have reacted better. But I also remember like the time where I did write a whole letter to my mom. Like I was literally like, I remember when I did come out, like there were people like in their like late 30s and 40s who would like tell me like, oh my God, like you're so strong. Like, you came out, you were so young. And like, I remember, oh my God, I'm getting like so emotional now. I don't know why. But I remember like being like, I was at a point in my life where it was like, I was literally going to kill myself or like I had to, deal with it. And so that's really what it was. So I didn't really have a choice. And but I'm really lucky because even like I was at that point, but I had a really supportive family. And like it's not like, once they knew, it was like, super easy. Like, oh yeah, like, it was something I struggled with for like 17 years. And then even though like my mom told me she knew as a fact since kindergarten, because every day I would come home from kindergarten with a full face of makeup and I would say this girl in my class would like harass me during recess to put makeup on me, but it was really like me begging to use like her kitty makeup kit. And like, so like my parents definitely prepare themselves, but it's still like once you confirm it, like, and it's official, it's definitely something that has to be processed by the other people. And, I respect that because, it's something I struggle with. Now they're going to, especially growing up in the community. But I was really lucky that like my mother was like always really accepting, like, she was religious like her whole life. And she was struggling with the idea that like, because we grew up in a community and the community makes it seem as though in Judaism, it's just not a thing. It's not real, all this stuff. But my mom said like, she knew as a fact. It's like, if you watch our family videos and I'm like 2 years old, like you can already see it then. And it's like, so she's like, I know like for a fact, like, that this is what you are. So like, but over time, like I thought I was at a fork in the road. Like, am I going to be Jewish or am I going to be gay? I thought like it's one or the other. And then I realized that, just because a community that I grew up in makes it seem as though it's not something or stuff like that. Like, nothing is black and white with anything in Judaism. Like, it's not just the Torah. There's so many breakoffs of it. Like, there's Rashi and Onkelos and all these things. Like, I don't know if people are going to all understand that, but like, there's Gemara, which goes over different things and different rabbis are arguing over things and what it should be. Like, there's so many things that are not clear cut and are a gray area. And rabbis are, ready to explore certain things and then completely ignorant and not ready to explore other things. So, and then I realized that like, I have no doubt in my mind that, God made me the way I am. And like, even though like in life, like I would be considered like not religious, I think I'm more connected to Judaism now. Like I always say that I live in Israel now, Like, and a big part of me moving here was, Judaism. And I would say that I'm definitely more connected to Judaism now than I ever was growing up religious. Not that I'm anti-religious or I think, whatever. I think that, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about you is the fact that you are very religious and you grew into something more than we grew up as, but you're also not the norm for what would be in your community, where you are much more open-minded and you do see things, from a larger lens instead of confining yourself in a very small, narrow box, which unfortunately is not so common, which it should be. And it's sad. But so I realized that, my relationship to God is something that's between me and God, and that I have to do it in a way where I'm not, following like the laws of the book by like, out of fear or out of like, because God's going to smite me or like, just out of habit. Like the things that I do, it's because I genuinely feel connected to it and it means something. So that was, it was a hard time in my life, but pretty crazy times. But, we all go through crazy struggles. I think that one of the biggest things I learned from the whole experience is like, everyone is trying to like, find their happiness in life, and happiness definitely is a choice and it is a perspective. And that's something I learned as I became an adult. But I also realized like sometimes you have to go through, really tough times or crazy obstacles to get to that point. Like I knew coming out, like there's going to be a lot of the community who wasn't going to accept me. I might be like banned from places. Like I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was so miserable that I knew that I would have to go through all those obstacles in order to get to a place where I was happier for myself.
Right.
And
yeah, so it's funny because that's what I spoke about at the family reunion when I spoke, was about having to go through difficult times in order to appreciate and, get to the more. It's so interesting because I remember obviously these things going on, but like I was just a kid and I had zero idea as to what was really going on, Like you were going through what mom and dad were going through. I was just kind of hanging around playing video games, like eating cheese sticks. I literally was completely on my own to myself. And then you told me you wanted to have a meeting with me, and then you told me, and I was just like, all right. And I remember at the time, they had there was this thing called like Form Spring or something on Facebook.
Yeah. Form Spring.me.
Right? People could ask you like anonymous questions, and people would ask me questions. Sometimes it gets posted on Facebook, and someone asked, like, what did you do when you found out your brother was gay? And I was like, I don't know, went home and played video games. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Am I supposed to have like a Suda? Like what?
And it's funny because like growing up, always people would be like, kids in middle school, oh, you're so gay. Oh, you're so gay. Right. And then when like it was confirmed to like, oh my God, like you're really gay. It's like,
right. Like, did you not mean it when you were saying it?
Exactly. Right. It was just like, more of like, I guess like a,
it's also interesting because I feel like obviously kids would say things to you and you get bullied and whatnot, but like, I don't remember any of my friends ever like mentioning anything to me or saying. It could be that they were more like nervous, like maybe I'd get upset at them, which I probably would have. I'm naturally I get very like defensive about my family in general. So that's probably why no one said anything, but yeah. I think, in terms of me and my own personal relationship and getting here, obviously, as Sheldon said, we grew up pretty modern Orthodox, and something that I appreciate about having grown up that way is just that, is like Sheldon said before, it's easier to develop a sensitivity towards other people and what they're going through and their struggles and their, and when they're trying to achieve something or to work towards something, you can appreciate that from the same aspect. A lot of people who grew up similar to how I grew up, their relationship with God is a lot more meaningful now because they came to a lot of these things on their own, and they came to appreciate a lot of these things on their own, not the other way around, where they were raised a certain way with doing all these things. And then they sort of, and obviously, for the most part, most of school, it's interesting because I feel like most of elementary school, I was just kind of doing the things that we were supposed to be doing, but I never really put a lot of thought into Judaism. I never really thought about Hashem very often. I never really thought about God that much. It was just kind of, I'm Jewish and this is what I do. And I keep Shabbos and go to shul and eat kosher and all these things. And I went to Jewish school and I was just a class clown. I'd never really paid attention or learned anything. And then, in fact, in fifth grade, I think it was fifth grade, I was pulled out of my class, couldn't be in class anymore. They put me in a special class. And then in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, me and 4 of my friends were in a class with one teacher the entire day, every day, because we were a nuisance or disrupting the other class or the other kids. But I ended up going away for high school to Memphis for my first year. And I think a lot of it was because, our father is very encouraging of us being independent and being on our own. And part of that was
maybe boarding school.
No, obviously we weren't forced to go, but it was.
I always tell our nieces. I was just telling them when I was in New York. I was like, right. Like in like those movies where like the evil stepmom ships the brats up to boarding school, and they're like, yeah, I'm like, yeah, that was me.
Right. So you went to Baltimore. So I went to Memphis for high school. It was just a small place. It seemed nice. I knew two people that were there from one from Chicago, who was a couple years older than me. Another friend of mine who's still one of my closest friends now today, who I went to camp with. But other than that, I didn't know anyone, and I was totally on my own. I had no family there, and no parents watching over me. So at that point, the focus, because I had already not really been paying much attention to my Judaism, it was more just kind of enjoying high school and not really doing anything and eating chewy chocolate chip cookies. I pounded tons of chewy chocolate chip cookies. I used to sit there after school with smearing peanut butter, Skippy peanut butter on those chewy chocolate chips.
Oh my God.
Popping them. I ballooned.
Love Skippy.
And then
ballooned.
And I got involved
a lot in high school.
Yeah. I got pretty into working out. I just remained husky throughout that entire process. But I got very involved in NCSY, which for those who don't know is a Jewish youth organization that has events for a Shabbos, a Sabbath, for a weekend. You get together with a bunch of people, a bunch of friends. It's really fun, and it's really fun.
Love that.
So I got pretty involved in that. But again, it was more just the aspect of meeting friends and having a good time and hanging out and seeing people from different states, different friends I have that I wouldn't otherwise be able to see. And for that, I said, at that point, I kind of was not really just thinking about much in terms of Judaism. I was just, there was a lack of interest, and also the environment where I was. Probably 95% of the friends I had there at the time in that school were not religious. Even if their families were religious, they weren't. So obviously, it wasn't the most conducive environment to a religious experience. So, but then when I was going into, I think it was going into 10th, 11th grade.
The year between 10th
and 11th grade, I think. I think I was going into 10th grade, and I was going, and the year I was going to 11th grade, I went on that summer program.
You went 2 years,
NCSY ICE. So I went in this program with NCSY called ICE, where you travel to Europe and then Israel for a couple of weeks. And that was, I guess, the turning point for me in terms of my religiosity. I met my rabbi there, Rabbi Lashak at the time. He and his wife had run this program for many years, up until a few years recently. They retired the job. But he just shared a lot of things with me that I've never been taught before, and a lot of more meaningful things that spoke to me. Everyone has different things that speak to them, and that interests them. And so he spoke to things that interested me and piqued my curiosity. And I just began to study more of the things in Judaism that spoke to me, and that itself brought me a lot closer. I ended up leaving high school a year early after my junior year. I told my parents I would get my diploma early in the summer. Went to one day of summer classes, came home and said, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to learn in the summer. I thought I'd be able to do it. It's 4 weeks. And the teacher who runs it is so nice.
It's good.
I showed up the first day, and the teacher there was great. I had them during the year, and I was like, I can't be doing. I could barely do work during the school year. I'm definitely not doing work in the summer. So I ended up. And at that point, I already told them in the school and mom and dad that I wasn't going back my senior year, and I was going to Israel. So I ended up going to Israel a year early. I ended up getting my.
But actually, you told dad, and then I was with mom in Israel when she found out from dad how you're not going back. She was like,
okay. That was the best decision. That was one of the best decisions I've ever made, just because I wasn't doing anything in Chicago at home. I was, going to high school. I was just not doing anything. I was just not doing anything. So I wanted to get out, and I was yearning for something more. I needed something more. So then I went to Israel, and so many of my closest friends today, I met my first year there when I didn't know anyone. I had no friends going with me. So I did my gap year there, and that gap year turned into 4 gap years. And then I ended up coming back to America, working for a bit,
But you were never going to do at the time. You were like, I'm
right.
going to stay in Israel.
I was going to stay in Israel and continue learning and studying, maybe teach. And then I came back and met my wife, my now wife. And then I stayed in America, engaged, married.
Hopefully we'll rip you on over here at some point.
Right. So I think, because I was given an advantage, I think, in a lot of ways, because of the fact that I grew up in a family that's so diverse, and we went through a lot of things that were more taboo or uncommon in the Jewish community. You coming out and obviously other family things going on. There was a lot going on that other people didn't seem to have going on
at once.
Right, and everyone sees what's going on. So I was just kind of used to this kind of being a part of that, and that's why I think I was able to maintain a sort of open mind in terms of being able to have sympathy towards other people and recognizing that just because you don't necessarily agree with someone's actions or ideologies doesn't mean that you can't appreciate what it is that they're going through and the struggles that they have and the struggles and the obstacles that they've overcome. And that's a big thing for me. And that's why I think I would get so bothered when people would like take shots at the family or at me for certain things, because it's just a lack of it just comes down to a lack of sensitivity for what another human being is going through. And that's why and that's why, and this is the last thing I'll say, you can take it. I feel like one thing I always tell my wife and a couple of my friends is I appreciate criticism, but not cynicism. So if you want to have a conversation and we can discuss different points of views and different perspectives and disagree, that's beautiful. But once you start taking shots at people or putting other people down or saying, I just don't appreciate that. So this is not for me. So I do appreciate that I was given that opportunity to sort of have a more diverse background.
Like, I think, like what you mentioned before with like Form Spring, between Form Spring and in person, I would have a lot of people that would, come up to me. And there were some people who like, they might make stupid comments or, might ask me questions that some people would just take, really offensively. There's some people but we grew up in a community where they just genuinely didn't know. They just don't know. Like I was saying before, the only gay people I knew were Jack and Will. So there were some people where like, they didn't know, where I could have a conversation with them and they could either understand or like, start to understand. But then there's the other people who, no matter how many conversations you have with them, you're talking to a brick wall. It's never going to go anywhere. Like, you always have that. So, and I feel like that's something that's kind of unfortunate nowadays, is where people are, where there's some people who genuinely might not know something and need to be educated, or might say something that is offensive to a race or, to any different thing. And they genuinely don't know that they need to be educated, as opposed to just being like canceled and done and everyone just attacks you on Twitter and you're done. Like, that's not what's making change in the world. Like, if we're fighting for all these changes and stuff like that, you don't just cancel people or, block them on social media. That's not change or action. It's like hashtag thoughts and prayers. It's nothing. You're always going to have that, like the racist assholes, just like you're always going to have these anti-Semitic people in the world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of psycho people in the world. It doesn't mean you should just disregard everyone as someone who's not able to be educated or who doesn't know any better. If someone grew up in a household that was crazy racist and strictly religious, and then they kind of broke out of that and entered the world, maybe, like, I know people who were growing up in a very strict community who came out as gay and they still were very homophobic, because that's how they grew up. It's hard for them to disconnect from that. So, like, if someone grew up in a very racist household and then they're breaking out to the world, they need to be educated, but because they don't know. And not that excuses it for someone making remarks or anything like that, but it's always important to have a conversation. Line of communication is so important with everything in life.
Right.
And for such a connected world, we're also disconnected at the same time. It's mind-boggling.
Right.
Also,
we were kind of separate from each other for a good while, from like high school and on. So like, I feel like we never really there wasn't a lot of opportunity for us to like butt heads really about anything. Not that we necessarily
when you were graduating middle school, I was graduating high school.
Right. And then I went away, and then when you were in Chicago,
I was away for 9th and 10th grade. So like,
right.
Yeah. Crazy days being shipped off to Baltimore. That was an experience.
But what was your relationship? What was your relationship or your perspective at that point I guess, religiously or spiritually before you came out? Like, what was your,
I remember, like, as, like, Orthodox Jews, we prayed like 3 times a day, like in the morning, in like the early afternoon, and then like at night. And, there's this thing like Shemona Esrei, for those who like don't know, it's like the more serious, the most serious part, I would say, of like the prayers, where it's like, you're focusing on everything and saying all these things, and it's to yourself, it's quietly. And I remember like there's this like extra part that you can add by like modim, which is like one of the things you have to say, and it's basically a whole like thing asking for like atonement and stuff like that. I remember like it's like that classic line of like praying the gay away, like that's literally what I would do. But I would say this whole thing, and like I would be like apologizing to God, feeling as though this is something I caused, because I thought at first, like, from all the bullying I got at like middle school, like people saying, "Oh, you're so gay," like I thought like maybe it's just like it was so embedded in me that it's like making me think this, but it's not. And like, so like all these things, but then I thought like, oh my God, like I did this to myself. So I remember like apologizing to God and begging him to like, fix me, because it was just, it like, that's how I perceived it at the time. And then going through that while being in this horrendous school that I was sent to in Baltimore, it was just like, I'm a huge believer in everything happens for a reason. Like in middle school, I was bullied a lot by one kid in specific who I'm actually friendly with now. But at the time, I do look back at it and I see how it definitely built my character in middle school. Even though it was really hard for me at the time, I do see it like it definitely helped and give me that strength later on in life to come out. But I think that school in Baltimore is the one thing I don't see any good like in my life. But you live and you learn.
I was also so out of touch with like the family in general when I was in high school, because I was just kind of on my own and I wasn't.
There was a lot going on.
Home.
There was like an implosion of chaos above you, and you're the youngest. Right. So like it was like, and you were so young, so it was like, what the heck is going on?
I was just kind of in Memphis eating cookies and wondering,
Yeah, well, as long as you got those cookies, I guess you were doing some good.
Right.
Smearing on that Skippy.
It's so I don't know. What you're saying is very true. That people. It's more important we try to educate people. Obviously, some people can't be, they're not going to change. They're not going to, but the conversation is what's important, because you're always going to have those switch. Right.
But the only way to make change is to work towards that. Not like
even in like anyone who's ever been in a relationship, is the most important thing is communication. That's the most important thing in general. And it's funny because even in Judaism, on a spiritual level, it's our ability to talk and use our mouth that's considered one of the most valuable assets that we have. So I feel like it's all connected in that same way. We have to be very careful how we speak to one another, how we treat one another, and obviously disagreement is important. So much of Jewish literature and text is disagreements, is arguing, obviously in amicable ways to come to a truth, because it's coming from a good place rather than a place of, I think I'm better than you, and therefore I need to put you down in order to validate my point.
Right. And that comes from that person's own insecurities and issues.
Right.
Like regardless of any religion, what you are, it's like you're supposed to love your fellow neighbor like you love yourself. Like you're supposed to treat people nicely. So especially in a religious community, you would hope that, people like that's what they strive for, that they want to, you should be more open-minded. You should strive to appreciate all people. We're all made in God's image.
Right.
And even in Judaism, it says in the Torah, we're all made in God's image. And that's not just the Jews are made in God's image. That's every single person, no matter what religion you are, every single person is made in the image of God for whatever reason. They're put on this earth, even bad people, for a reason. Things like the Holocaust, which was freaking horrendous and still incomprehensible, no matter how much education I've gotten on it.
Right.
How could something like that happen? But we don't know how it shaped the world to what it is today. Like, we don't know. We'll never know God's plan, to quote Drake. But that's what it is. Man plans, God laughs. It's the way it is. So it's just an interesting thing. And but I think everyone has to find spirituality in their own way, whatever that means for them. Whether it's God, whether it's just, Buddhism, or whether it's just being one with the earth, whatever it is. I feel like it's just important to be connected with something. Yeah.
Right.
Whatever you believe in, whatever it is. Like, I think it's important to be connected to something.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's, obviously with a lot a lot in the media recently has been about Kanye West and the anti-Semitic remarks and everything like that. But one thing I always valued and appreciated about the communities that we grew up in, even with the issues that I had, was the sense of community. Meaning we're so
100%.
We're very insular, but we're incredibly self-sustaining. We could, we have our own shops and stores and clothes.
We all help each other.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, growing up, I didn't, and even as I got older, like as Sheldon said before, we'd have to go to synagogue, shul, and pray 3 times a day. So for some people, it seems kind of emotionless and kind of just like a routine thing that you have to go and say these words. But ultimately, I think I realized as I got older that beyond just obviously developing a more meaningful experience, it's meant to also develop a sense of community, of coming together in the beginning, middle, and end of our days to kind of come out
no matter
of the work
what you're doing,
routine.
No matter who you are, what you're doing, what your job is, anything like that, everyone's stopping at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the reasons given as to why there's an afternoon prayer that's like smack in the middle of the day. It's because sometimes you got to get pulled out of the routine and the hustle and bustle of the regular day and just reconnect and just take
and
a
it's like that with Islam as well. Like they pray 5 times a day. And
right.
That's the whole thing is you're keeping the community together.
A very strong sense of community. It's so important. It's so important. And that's one of the reasons I think they were so good at obviously there's God. And then there's also our effort of maintaining a community and taking care of one another and looking after one another. So, what's been going on in the media has been a little bit crazy. I hope things are cooling down with,
that's the thing. It's like with everything though, like in a society, and that's the real disconnect that it's, I think that we spoke briefly about this in like that episode with Kanye, like, it's just like that disconnect. We're in such a woke society now and people are so much more accepting and all this stuff. And like, yet all this racist shit, all this anti-Semitic shit, all these school shootings, like all these things happening in the world. It's like, clearly there's a disconnect between how amazingly far we are and where we're at, because we're nowhere near where we're supposed to be.
Right.
And we have very separated.
Right. Something I always think about is like how I felt that for a little bit, like growing up, we were trying to like escape from labels, even within the Jewish community, specifically your levels of orthodoxy. Everyone has a label for what type of Jew you are, what type of person you are. Everyone gets
labeled, and I feel like what are these labels? I never wrote any of that stuff.
Right. So I felt like we were trying to move away from that, and we wanted a more open and diverse and accepting society. And yet I feel like we're somehow getting back to labeling everyone and everything.
Everybody.
Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative.
But that's the thing also, because living in Israel but like during the pandemic, how in America, and as an American, but I'm living here, in America, it's like you get the vaccine if you're like a leftist, but like you're anti-vaccine if you're like a Republican. It became like a very political thing. And here in Israel, it wasn't like that. It was like, no, we're like in this pandemic. Like, how did that become political? Like everything in America becomes political. And then all the news networks harp on that, the ones on the left, the ones on the right, and they all fight this agenda where like the agenda didn't have to be political at all, but they make it into something because then it's a hot topic and then it makes them money. And then it's a whole thing where it's like, how is why is this a political issue? And what does it have to be with right or left about a vaccine and like all these things? Like it's bizarre.
Right.
Bizarre.
Right. Everything is made to be like black and white, like you're on one side or the other side, and there can't be any gray area. Except I haven't watched a news station in years. I can't even watch the news.
I used to just watch every different network and like try to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what's maybe happening. Because it's crazy, and they all have an agenda. But that's the thing with America. I don't know any other country. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone tell me if I'm wrong. But I don't know any other country where like news stations and news anchors are all up for nominations and Emmys and all this stuff. And it's a bizarre concept because they literally, you see it so clearly how each one of them has their own agenda. They're not here to like report the news because they care about the people. They're all there with investors and backers and people who have an agenda, whether it's political, whether it's social. It's mind-boggling.
Right money. They just want money.
In America, it's all about the dollar. all about the dollar.
Got to get those ratings up. Yeah, the fact that they get awards is wild. Like they're obviously, they're good at journalism and that, but it's not even about journalism anymore. It's more about putting on a show and entertainment and ratings.
It's like the medication commercials. Until I moved to Israel, when I went to visit America the first time, when I went back, I never realized, because we don't have medication commercials here on TV. And we'll go back to America, and it's like every antidepressant commercial. It's like someone walking in a forest laughing, and they're eating salads, just dying of laughter because salad's hilarious, apparently. Right. And all these people, they always get a dog when they're on the meds. They're always walking a dog through the park, and they bump into someone in the park. Like, oh my god, you're in this park too. Oh my god, let's go on a date and get married. It's like this was for antidepressants. Like, how did this whole story just take place? I'm not sure. Or some
side effects may include your eyes and ears falling off.
And that's when they're smiling the most. When it's like, oh my god, isn't this funny? Because they're trying to distract you from all the voiceovers of your lips might fall off, your brain might seep out of your ears.
I think America is one of only 2 countries in the entire world that allow commercials for pharmaceuticals.
I'm in America watching TV. Next thing you know, Khloe Kardashian's on TV with her migraines, and she takes this medication for her migraines. I'm like, how are you allowed to have a celebrity endorsement for medication? That should be illegal.
It's crazy.
Or Vanessa Hudgens was on some commercial, for some birth control. I'm like, how are you doing a celebrity endorsement, for a medication? And are these people actually on the medication? You can't push stuff like that. It's very bizarre. But Khloe Kardashian takes it for her migraines, so I need to get it. And she's eating popcorn in the commercial. Her nails are 10 feet long. I have no idea. But
I never understood that. It's so strange. And then you hear a lot of these stories come out with these big pharmaceutical companies who knew that
the Sackler family with the opioids and everything they've done. And it's not just they knew about it; they tried covering it up. And that whole thing is that is what it comes down to in America. It's all about the money. Or Skrelensky, whatever his name was, that upped that medication by 700%. It's sickening. It's sickening.
Right.
People who really can't afford it, but they need it, are just screwed. When I just went back to America, I had the flu. I don't have health insurance in America anymore. Here in Israel, it's socialized. I don't worry about that stuff. In America, I had the flu. I had to get Tamiflu. The guy's like, you don't have insurance? I'm like, no. He's like, it's going to be $50. I'm like, well, first of all, I thought it was going to be much worse than that. So I was like, okay, for you. But what if I had to go to the hospital or something? I would just be like, no, I'm not going to the hospital. I can't afford that shit. It's ridiculous. And I'm an American. And it's crazy. And people live there like that.
So I remember being in Israel and having to pay out of pocket for a hospital visit.
And it's a joke.
It was a joke. We paid 90 shekel, which is I don't know what that translates to into dollars.
$26.
Yeah, a month for that's
right.
For the
so I pay
tier.
right exactly. I'm on the top tier, so I pay 93 shekel a month. It's $26, $27, and that's because I'm on the top tier thing.
Right.
And it's and in America, everything's just so crazy. And then you pay all these copays and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And then when you actually need to use the insurance, no matter what it is, health insurance, car insurance, they're like, oh, wait, you wanted to use the insurance you're paying for? Oh, we're going to up your rates, or we're just going to drop you like it's hot. And it's then what is the point of any of this? Clearly it's a very broken system, especially when all these insurance companies are privately owned. It's the fact that you're dealing with privately owned companies when it comes to the healthcare is it's a ridiculous system.
Right. There's always a few at the top that control the entire industry.
That's what it's all about. Control. Craziness.
Absolutely.
That's why happiness is a choice. You just got to wake up. I was just talking to my coworker today. I was like, that's the whole thing with life. You can either laugh or cry. Because it's there's this really funny meme of Hillary Clinton where she just her hands are up and it's just when you just realize everything is going to shit. It's just
right. Right. It's all about perspective. It's all about how we're looking at things. And the goal is to hopefully have a better outlook and a better perspective and a deeper sensitivity towards others and what they're going through. And hopefully,
and like we said, the best way to do that is communication.
Communication. Yes, it is. Communication. And with that, we're going to end our communication right here.
Yes.
I think our time is up. Thank God we're back in good health. So we should be back on a regular schedule next week.
Yes.
And we'll catch everyone on the flippity flap.
If you guys have any topics you want us to discuss or any comments or feedback, we are more than happy to help. And if you're watching on YouTube, then subscribe and like and leave a comment.
All
right?
that good
Is that
stuff.
the whole catchphrase everyone always
That's the
does?
whole
Like,
thing.
Smash that like button, all that
exactly.
stuff. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. If you told me to smash that like button one more time, I'm going to smash my window.
Exactly.
But
and we'll catch everyone next week, God willing.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Be well.